Hi there, and thank you for joining me for today's live reading of Yesterday's Over, Book 3 in the Philly Heat series by Becky Flade, and this is presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Chapter 1. The smell of charred flesh overwhelmed the scent of antiseptic and the industrial cleaner used to keep the room sterile. It resembled any other medical suite in any other medical facility: gurneys, tools, staff, and scrubs. But unlike those other rooms, there was no sense of urgency in Trudy's morgue. The reduced temperature preserved organic material. It preserved the odor as well. It didn't go away despite the air purification system. Trudy's eyes and nostrils burned. The menthol gel she'd rubbed on her upper lip lost the war hours earlier, but she didn't stop. Couldn't. The victims and their families needed answers. She couldn't bring back the homes they lost, the lives destroyed, the memories buried under cindered rubble, but this she could do, and would, without complaint. Dr. Beasley! Kara, I've told you repeatedly to call me Trudy. She lifted her head. Kara grimaced as the latest body bag arrived. Trudy swallowed a sigh. She'd cautioned Kara regarding her reactions. Their patients may be dead, but still deserved respect. The young woman was smart and capable, but not suited for a job in the morgue. Please don't make that face. I'm sorry, Dr. Trudy, but you need to see this. With her gloved hands elevated to prevent cross-contamination, Trudy joined the intern. She snapped her gloves off after a quick glance. Pick up the autopsy where I left off. I need to make a call. She ignored the greetings as she crossed the hall to her office. Since she often spent more time here than at home, she kept the environment comfortable rather than institutional, opting for an overstuffed sofa and soft lighting from funny little candlestick lamps with French shades, but she flicked on the fluorescent overheads in passing and spun through the ancient Rolodex she kept on her desk. Dialed and grabbed a water bottle from the mini fridge. Trudy guzzled down cool, wet relief. The anthropology department at the University of Penn. How can I help you? A prim voice answered. Trudy pictured the office receptionist from her high school. The woman's stare could wither the rowdiest of teenagers. Good afternoon. This is Dr. Gertrude Beasley, Assistant Chief Medical Examiner for the City of Philadelphia. We're working on the victims from the explosion and have recovered skeletal remains. How many? How old? Undetermined. We need a forensic anthropologist to consult. Trudy cut off the next question. Look, I'm not trying to be rude, but if your guy is going to ask the same questions, I'd rather answer them once. Understood. Professor Roberts is teaching this morning, but his afternoon is free. He can be there in about an hour. Perfect. Thank you. Trudy placed the handset in its cradle, closed her eyes, and took a deep breath. The cucumber and eucalyptus oil diffuser did little to help ease the knots in her neck and shoulders. As she stood in the quiet that wasn't, the sounds of people in the hall of the activity death birth were as common as the sound of her own pulse in her ears and didn't register. But the hum generated by the commercial lighting bled through and set her back teeth on edge. 5 minutes. I need 5 minutes. Trudy cut off the overheads, turned the lock on her door, and sank onto the sofa. Death was her job. She was a scientist, a doctor foremost. Though she had been born with a gift for compartmentalization, she never learned how to not become emotionally involved. Once she shut off the scientist, the woman grieved. 3 days of burned bodies, plus the violent, unexplained, and unattended deaths Philadelphia regularly generated. She'd been going nonstop. Her boss handled the press and the police. Her assistants dealt with frantic family members. Trudy delegated autopsies where she could, but she had little rest. Now bones, an entire bag of bones. It takes weeks, sometimes years, for a body to decompose, depending on a variety of factors, she recalled from her days in medical school. Those bones aren't recently dead. Fresh death was her job, one that never stopped. I'm going home early tonight. I'm going to shower and unplug and decompress. She pushed herself off the couch and rejoined her team in the autopsy suite. Tam, call down to security. There's an anthropologist coming over from Penn. Make sure he's brought straight up. She stepped to the sloped steel dissection table. Kara had completed the Y incision and was examining the lungs. What do you see? No evidence of smoke inhalation. What conclusions can you draw from that? The fire got to him first? No, if he was alive when the fire reached him, he'd have inhaled smoke. This was the first body from the blast site they'd autopsy who hadn't died from asphyxiation before the fire ravaged their remains. We're going to look deeper to prove it, but I think he died from the concussive force of the explosion. Based on the depth of the burned tissue, he was likely closer to the initial blast than the others we've seen. Trudy lifted the otoscope off the tray and peered into the ear canal. She passed it to Kara. What do you see? The eardrum on the left ruptured. The right, too. That's caused by the concussive wave followed an explosion. Think of it like dropping a rock into a puddle. The ripples move out, widening and softening as they travel further from the center. If there was anyone at the ignition point, it blew them to pieces. The next wave suffered concussive force injuries, which made it difficult, or, like this man, impossible to escape. Then we have smoke inhalation deaths. The deaths and injuries rippled from the center. We're seeing the victims in reverse order as responders work from the outside in. Have you ever seen anything like this before? Kara set the lungs aside after noting their weight. During medical school, it was a hard lesson to learn. The repercussions from that one day of death, despair, and destruction still rippled throughout the world. It marked her and many other doctors who'd volunteered. She'd seen nothing like it before or since. I helped with the crash victims from Flight 93. When they had enough hands there, I volunteered in Manhattan. Not exactly the same, but close enough to bring back some hard emotions. How do you deal with it? It's not about you or me. It's our job to do for them the best we can as doctors and scientists. When you go home, you deal with it then. My friend, she's a cop, she boxes. Another friend of mine, she's a prosecutor, she runs. Find a healthy outlet, process, and come back the next day for the next victim, the next family. For her, it was the only way to survive. Trudy pointed. You see here and here? The blast caused these perforations as well. Visual assessment shows damage to the liver, spleen, bladder, stomach. He'd have died from internal bleeding without immediate medical attention. But that's not what killed him? Kara asked. No, I suspect we'll find cause of death when we open the cranium. Shaken baby syndrome in a 200 plus pound grown man. Get some x-rays. I bet there's a fair amount of fracturing to the bones. Trudy turned, ready to rebuke the intrusion. He, whoever he was correct. This was her lab, her student, and there was a pecking order for a reason. She hesitated, the words lingering on her tongue. The stranger was tall compared to her, but likely stood at barely 6 feet, making him of average height. He was skinny, wiry, likely creating the impression he was taller than he was. He wore an old-fashioned three-piece suit. Was that tweed? With stylishly patched elbows and wire-rimmed glasses under unruly dark blonde curls. The effect was scholarly, nerdy, and Trudy's mouth watered. Can I help you? Professor Benjamin Roberts. He stepped forward and extended a hand. You asked for a consult? I did, yes, but not on this. The glove snapped when she removed it. Get a grip, girl. She grasped his hand and pumped twice. Kara, get x-rays when you've finished here. Do not open the skull without me. Follow me, Professor. Please, call me Ben. He fell into step beside her. Ben, I wasn't expecting you until later. I let my students go early when my assistant gave me this message. My curiosity got the best of me. How can I help? Take a look. Trudy opened the body bag and stepped back as he inspected the bones within. Where were these found? South Philly, in the rubble from last week's explosion. At a quick glance, I can tell you these bodies died long before that. Thank you, Captain Obvious, she thought, but said, I know, that's why I asked for the consult. Yes, of course. Bodies? Trudy asked. Oh, yes. He turned, pulling off his glasses and rubbing at the bridge of his nose absently. There are 3 femurs sitting right on top of the pile. People only have 2, she interrupted. Either he thinks I'm an idiot or he's socially inept. Gross anatomy covered that part. He grinned. The lopsided smile, chipped front tooth, and how his eyes crinkled in the corners dissolved her annoyance, but her pulse jittered a quick dance when a deep dimple in one cheek winked at her. She smiled back at him. Do you have room for me to catalog the bones? Do you need more than this table? Yes, at least one more. If possible, I need to know as precisely as possible where they discover these remains. He replaced his glasses and his eyes glazed over with purpose. Under normal circumstances, I'd be upset the bones weren't professionally exhumed and treated. I'd insist on seeing the site, making a photo record of the find. Remove the bones carefully and take soil samples for testing, things like that. These are not normal circumstances. Indeed, Trudy tugged on the bag. But we're not completely ignorant of how to handle remains. She pointed to a clear plastic window and the card inside. Each body bag includes as much information as they could safely gather. including the location of the remains coded to correspond with that. She pointed. Aerial view of the blast scene, the one with the grid overlay. Dr. Beasley, Kara called. If you need anything, ask. Trudy hurried over to the exam table. What do you have, Kara? The x-rays Dr. Roberts suggested. He was right. Look at this brain. Looks like you found the cause of death. The pressure inside the skull caused the brain to herniate. He was dead instantly. Let me see the other x-rays. They worked quietly in their well-established rhythm of teacher and student. Other doctors and interns worked at similar stations, and personnel wandered in and out, dropping off results, collecting specimens. It was a familiar dance, one Trudy, as de facto head of the morgue, led with practiced grace. Excuse me, Dr. Beasley? Trudy looked up, her hands inside the body's abdomen to her wrists. The blood drained from Ben's face, and it turned a sickly shade. Dear Lord, he breathed. Moving quickly, Trudy snapped off her gloves and, following a subtle nod to Kara, took Ben by the arm and led him into her office. Here, sit. She shoved him down onto the sofa. Put your head between your knees and breathe. Trudy pulled 2 water bottles and a cold pack from her office fridge. She placed the cold pack on the back of his neck and waited. Let me know if you're going to puke. I've got water here for you when you're ready. He sat up and leaned back, his glasses dangling from his fingertips, his hands resting on his knees, eyes closed. That was humiliating. Nonsense. Just about everybody vomits at their first autopsy. I've seen more people than you'd guess faint. You're saying that to make me feel better? I've even seen cops toss their cookies. Doctors don't bat an eyelash, but burn bodies are difficult, even for us. It's the smell. Here, she handed him the water when he opened his eyes. You had a question before? Yes, I wanted to ask if I could have that second table. Not a problem. How's it going? There are bones from at least 3 different bodies in the bag, but I doubt there's enough to complete even one full skeleton. They were preserved, not formally buried, but not exposed to the elements either. We'll know much more later. It's an amazing discovery. An amazing discovery? It's a pile of discarded people. Tragic? Yes. Revolting? Also yes. But amazing? It's rather gruesome, don't you think? What makes you say that? A pile of bones? Ben laughed. You were wrist deep in the cavity of a body missing half its skull, a person who was alive days ago, and you think a pile of long dead bones is gruesome? Point, she smiled. Feeling better? I am, yes. Thank you. You're welcome. Will you do carbon dating on the bones? No, I don't think they're old enough or young enough to date. Pardon? Traditionally, human bones need to be between 500 and 50,000 years old for carbon dating to be accurate. Recent studies have shown in younger remains we can carbon date soft tissue with a fair bit of success. Our bag of bones falls in the window between the two. How old do you think they are? Best guess, less than 100 years. It's fascinating. I've seen the scene on the news and the grid you've hung in your autopsy suite. There wasn't a cemetery there, but depending on when the homes were built, there could have been one at one time. His professor mode is fascinating. But you said they weren't firmly buried. As recently as the 1950s, caskets manufactured in the United States were largely made of wood and lined with cloth made from natural fibers. Both break down. That's a weird thing to know. Not in my field. He pushed himself to standing. Thank you for distracting me. You're welcome. Understanding the unspoken suggestion they return to work and agreeing with it, she led him back to the suite, snagging an aide to request an extra exam table. When she turned back, he held up a finger, asking for a moment. Miss Carter, hello. Yes, can you contact Peter and ask him if he can cover my lectures for the rest of the week? Thank you. Yes, I'll likely be working here at the medical examiner's office the rest of the week. He laughed. Go ahead, on me. Bye. He disconnected and tucked the cell in his pocket. Sorry, that was rude. I didn't intend to be. I'd assumed your conversation would last longer. Miss Carter? Peter? Sounds like the cast of a superhero movie. He laughed. Agent Carter and Peter Parker? They'll love that. Miss Christina Carter is my administrative assistant / secretary / mother hen / gal Friday. Peter Sullivan is a PhD candidate and my teaching assistant. They are both superheroes. I'd be lost without them. And I should have checked with whoever's in charge here before inviting myself to stay. I'm the one in charge, and right now, those remains stay here. I'd assumed you'd be staying with them, but they're not leaving. Why do they have to stay here? For the time being, they're potential evidence. Did it not occur to you that those bones could be the remains of murder victims?